2022 brought us what can only be described as world-changing moments. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the death of Britain's longest-serving monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the United States, protests in Iran, and so much more. 2022 is also a big year for Alberta. We're experiencing the most dramatic fiscal turnaround in our history. Premier Danielle Smith was elected leader of the UCP and became the 19th Premier of Alberta. And Albertans were really challenged with the rise in inflation. And so much more has happened this year. Hey there, you're listening to The Brief, an Alberta Better podcast series. I'm Brittany Brander, and in this series, my co-host, Scott Crockett, and I explore Alberta's big challenges, celebrate stories of growth, innovation, and prosperity, and discover bold ideas to make life better for Albertans. So on today's episode, we're back with our annual year in review with BCA's President Adam Legge. We reminisce and we recap the major stories of 2022, how Alberta's economy has fared throughout the year, the big challenges Albertans had faced this year, and the major policy wins. And we also provide a sneak peek into what we're cooking up for 2023 and what's keeping us up at night as we turn the page on 2022. This is our last episode of this season, and we'll be taking a break over the holiday to recharge, and we'll be coming back in the new year with a brand new season of the business, economic, and policy stories from around Alberta and Canada. If you found this episode interesting or insightful, let us know by heading over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a quick review and a rating. Now, on to the show.
All right, Adam. So let's begin with the broadest picture possible. Let's reflect on 2022. And I'd like you to hit, if 2022 was a movie, what were some of the biggest plot points for Alberta, prosperity, its people? What really stands out to you?
Well, the one that I think just stares us in the face is the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. That has, I think so many people were thinking we might be coming out of the pandemic with, good economic outcomes. The lockdowns were going to be beginning to cycle off. The masking mandates, vaccinations were up. So things were looking quite rosy and very optimistic at the beginning of 2022. And then in February, when Russia invaded Ukraine, all bets were off. And it has changed materially the trajectory of the year for a whole host of things, implications it's had on, just what another power is doing to a democratically unique state, and then the implications for everything from displaced Ukrainians and refugees to energy and food stability, security, affordability, and what that has then done to the downstream impacts on energy markets and availability in Europe, what we're facing in Canada in terms of not only the energy security and prices, but also the role we could play. It's affected food markets, driven inflation tremendously high, not only from the raw ingredients and inputs like fertilizer, seed, but also the end product. And so it has had tremendous implications and repercussions for the year. And so nothing comes even remotely close in terms of the big story of the year than the Russian invasion.
Yeah, I totally agree. That is the big story for the year. Do you think it's fair to say that invasion had and the knock-on implications have had an outsized impact on a country like Canada generally, but in specific, a place like Alberta? It's certainly not as much of an impact as people who are very, very close to that conflict. But, do you think that we've been uniquely affected by it?
Absolutely, for a few reasons. One I think is that the knock-on effect is that this has exposed energy insecurity around the world and Europe's reliance on Russian energy. So their quick move to get off of that has then created this whole global reshuffling of energy markets. Obviously, as a producer of oil and gas in Canada, that's impacted not only the price and therefore some of the opportunities and profitability of companies here in Canada, but then also the longer term potential role we could play globally going forward. Places like Manitoba or Prince Edward Island obviously are not as affected by this, but with Alberta, not only because it is very much a key economic engine for us, but also what it could do for or the role we could play going forward in terms of being a more stable, secure, democratic, reliable source of energy globally.
Well, and that's where I wanted to go, because you talk to lots of CEOs of large companies and also lots of politicians. To what extent do you think the conversation around those two topics, energy and food, has changed this year as a result of that? How optimistic are you that there's any kind of new day dawning? And I'm thinking particularly maybe on the energy side about some pragmatism in the energy markets. Do you have reason to be optimistic or not?
I mean, I think there's pragmatism in the energy markets for sure. I don't know if there's necessarily pragmatism from a federal policy standpoint. Sure. You know, I think this is when we're still working on our Define the Decade project while this is unfolding, and we had a number of our task force members saying, "Look, this is a Berlin Wall moment, right, where the world is going to change going forward." Totally agree with that. So I think many energy companies were saying, we're ready to go. We could increase production. We want to be able to help and be a global supplier. Canada's challenge is access to markets. And so we just don't have the ability to ship drastically larger amounts of crude or bitumen. And we're even more constrained from a natural gas and an LNG standpoint. So we had to do what we could. You know, you've seen some softening of messages from time to time around Canada's role, particularly on the LNG side. But I don't see the reaction that I would hope our country would have taken, which was, yes, the world needs us right now. We will move heaven and earth to help our global allies. We have not done that. We sent the German chancellor home with a hydrogen deal, but not anything related to LNG. And so I think we unfortunately have sent a signal to the world that we're not going to be that ally that will step up to help our friends in need, which to me is unfortunate, because I think it's a reputational hit we've taken, and that says to me, what will the world come to us again in the future?
Yeah, disappointing that it hasn't been quite that full Berlin Wall moment yet, at least not in terms of Canada's response to it. Okay, so that's the war in Ukraine, and that was the big story. What are some of the other stories when you look back at the year? Some of the plot points that define 2022 for you?
Well, it was a U.S. midterm year, and so there was speculation of a Republican wave that would overtake potentially both the House and the Senate. Didn't materialize, so it's kind of on razor's edge with respect to those. So it's a little less of dramatic swing in the U.S. environment there, so it creates a bit more stability. However, most of the experts in terms of U.S.-Canadian relationships suggest that nothing's going to get any easier for Canada in terms of its trade relationship, or even for the energy sector. Now, we saw the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, she was the longest serving monarch of recorded history, and
the only monarch most Canadians have ever known.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And so that was a momentous day. I can remember the moment I was informed and became aware of that. I
can too.
You sort of recall those moments in time where sort of key historical events happen, and that's one that I know will stick in my mind. We saw the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the U.S., which has tremendous implications for women and women's health and rights in the United States. Thankfully, Canada has continued to protect abortion laws and the rights of women. So happy that remains here. We saw a provincial leadership vote amongst the UCP. Saw the election of Danielle Smith as Alberta's 19th premier. So she's got a short period of time to try and make some progress, and then we go to the polls likely in May of next year. So lots of lots of big figure issues, but nothing really underscores it like the energy and food insecurities we're seeing as a result of the invasion.
Absolutely. So if that's the big picture that we started with, next I'd like to zoom in a little bit on some aspects of Alberta. And I want to take a little tour de force through the areas of economy, people, and public policy, which I know is your favorite topic to discuss. So give us your sense as we sit here in December of 2022, how's the economy of Alberta doing?
It's been a strong year for Alberta's economy, largely because of our commodity exposure in a favorable way. Prices have been strong both on the energy side and also the food side. Our job market has been a little bit up and down throughout the year, result of some growth and investment in some of those two sectors I just mentioned. But we created more jobs in terms of the percentage growth year over year than every other province except for PEI. So it did very well on a percentage basis. And
PEI is working with a bit of a different denominator.
Yeah, they've got
in terms of percentage basis, right?
Yeah, exactly. But we're now that we're at the end of the year, the November data was just released. We are seeing some moderation inflation, some potential worrying signs. Unemployment in Alberta is up to 5.8%. That's higher than the national average of 5.1, largely a result of more people leaving the workforce and stopping their search for work. And that might be seasonality, but our cyclicality is such that we would hope to have seen a better than national average performance of our jobs market, but it hasn't to date. So it's tracking better than the national average, but there's also the worrying sign of the unemployment rate is higher. We've seen some trouble numbers in terms of the amount of job growth that particularly younger women are experiencing, and we're also seeing growth in what we track as the long-term unemployment, which is people that are unemployed for more than a year, and that has ticked back up in the past month or so. So that's problematic. We've seen a tremendous amount of investment activity in the province this year. Everything in terms of we had technology with two big announcements of Infosys and Emphasis, both investing in Calgary.
A tongue twister there sometimes to say them in the same sentence.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen a number of additional companies move into unicorn status, which is billion-dollar valuations. The most recent being Cement here in Alberta. We saw the announcement of de Havilland moving their manufacturing and head office facilities to Calgary. We've seen tremendous investment happening in Alberta's industrial heartland, outside of Edmonton, the Dow net zero facility, the Air Products hydrogen facility. So tremendous amount of diversified investment activity happening in the province, which is really very exciting. I think we'll weather any potential storm better than other places, largely because of our favorable commodity exposure at this sort of period in the cycle.
Right.
So Alberta does look to be doing better than other jurisdictions, but the big unknown is, quite frankly, the interest rates. That we just don't know where they're going to go. We've already seen 6 increases over the past while. The 7th looming tomorrow. We're recording on the 6th. Expected the Bank of Canada announce tomorrow. So that's having major implications. But the challenge is that those repercussions happen 12 to 18 months post decision. So we're actually only going to start to see the true economic impacts of the rising interest rates next summer.
Right. Or we're seeing today decisions that were made a year ago. Well, and let me put you on the spot for that one a little bit. Just Adam's opinion. How do you feel about the interest rate environment right now? Do you think it's time to still be really aggressive, or given this 12 to 18 month lag, is it more a time to sit back and see the implications of these?
Yeah, I think the Bank of Canada went too fast, too quickly. So I might be one of those people that is sort of not in the common camp of economists saying we need to control this quickly. I think for a couple of reasons. One is we're measuring inflation always measures year over year. And I think we're now in an environment where we've got the prices up, they're higher. I think it's more indicative to measure month over month and see whether the prices are going. And we've actually seen that has tempered and moderated. We're actually down to sort of that 4-ish% month over month. So that gives me some comfort that prices are moderating. I mean, there was a huge spike just as a result of Russia. Second, I think it's a supply driven. This is not an overheated bunch of consumers going and buying large screen TVs and things like that. This is just a shortage of stuff. And I worry that as we continue to ratchet up interest rates, we're going to make affordability issues. And people are literally today now making decisions between sort of food, heat, clothing, transportation, housing, those kinds of things. And I just do not think we should be treading in that territory. We can, there's other mechanisms we can use. And then finally, I just think it's a matter of these cycles take so long to kick in from a full implication of those decisions. And I think we're going to be feeling the first ratchet in the summer of next year, and it's going to flow into potentially 2024. So I worry that they have overshot. I would hope that they go no more than 50 basis points tomorrow, if they do at all. I think we also have to keep in mind that we're not the United States. And while we do have exposure that if we don't keep up with some of the rates, it affects the exchange rate. We're not a reserve currency. We're not the horsepower. We're not the typical fire of an economy that the US is. We face very different labor dynamics and investment dynamics and productivity dynamics. So I think we need to some degree, be very mindful of that. And while we do have to kind of keep in mind where the US is going, we shouldn't be measuring everything against, well, the US did this, so we have to do that. I think we just need to be a little bit more cautious. So I'm hoping the Bank of Canada is more cautious.
More cautious. So if that's the economy side of things, you already sort of opened the door a bit about people and affordability. How are the people of Alberta doing?
I think they're remarkably resilient people, and I think for a large degree there has been a relatively good year, particularly as in both the energy and agricultural sectors. We've seen, I think, mental health rise as a result of mask mandates lifted and sort of life to some degree returning to normal.
Like mental health has improved.
Mental health has improved. Yeah, exactly. there are new mental health challenges with affordability and job security and cost of living. So those are really changing. We've seen improvements in things like domestic violence. The Calgary Police Service reported that domestic violence incidents has actually dropped in 2022 compared to the same year 2021. So that's a good sign that, for example, getting out of lockdown, et cetera, that we've perhaps gotten to a better place.
We've seen the bottom, perhaps.
Seen the bottom,
at least
exactly.
this particular cycle.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that Albertans are faring quite well. It will depend upon how long and how painful this sort of affordability crisis spreads into the population. If it sort of remains in a limited pool, or if it's going to go into a broader swath of the population based on some of the lag factors we talked about a minute ago.
Right. So some things to watch there.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the third component of how Alberta is doing these days, policy. This was a pretty big year for public policy moves. A number of sort of key files moved forward, and things like the clean electricity standard, emissions caps, fertilizer caps. What are some of the big public policy items from this year in your mind, both provincially and federally?
I think federally, it's so dominated by the story of emissions and climate that's really what they've focused on. It's been clean electricity standard, clean fuel standard, oil and gas emissions cap, fertilizer, all under the auspices of emissions reduction, climate plan,
vehicle targets, even
EV targets, et cetera. So it reinforces for me that the federal government has a sole and singular focus, which is emissions policy and reduction, climate change policy, which I think is to some degree impairing their ability to see the broader prosperity agenda and create an economic plan and economic growth agenda. So I think that's been absent from what we saw, frankly, in the budget and to some degree from the fall economic statement. So they're trying to tie a lot of the economic injection into the economy, but it's largely through investments in things like hydrogen, critical minerals. It's not a broad-based recovery and an economic growth agenda. Provincially, we've seen the largest fiscal turnaround in this province's history as a result
Canadian history
as a result of the rise in energy prices. And so we saw a close to $12 billion deficit turn into a $12 or $13 billion surplus in a matter of 6 to 8 months. That's a remarkable story to be looking at where you're going to find some debt to borrow that, to now saying what are we going to do with the surplus. So I think there's a big conversation looming around what are we going to do with the surplus. We're going to release a paper on that before the end of the year on what we think the province should do. So I'd say that those are kind of the key pieces for public policy, provincially and federally.
So if that's where Alberta is today, let's take a little journey back through the year from BCA's perspective. So obviously the big headline is Define the Decade. We released that in June, and that took a big chunk of the last year, almost a full year, and took us around the province to talk to Albertans about what a good life is. So, what came of that was a bit of a vision and then an economic development framework. So can you just hit the highlights for those who haven't read the report or interacted with Define the Decade in any way? What came of that engagement and that research, and what's the vision? What are we recommending?
Yeah, I'd encourage everybody listening to go to definethedecade.com. We've got a ton of material, resources, reports, videos, et cetera, on that. But ultimately what Define the Decade was a 10-year vision for Alberta's prosperity and the plan to get there. We're trying to frame it and talk about it as the future for the province. And if we are going to be driving prosperity, we have to be very purposeful about that. And so we have to make some choices. But it was done in the spirit of resisting the notion that Alberta's best days are behind us. In fact, we believe Alberta's best days are ahead of us. And not only that, but we think that Alberta is just getting started. So we wanted to map out a vision that was really for Alberta by Albertans. We talked to over 2,000 Albertans all across the province, north, south, east, west, urban, rural, Indigenous elders, high school students, post-secondary students, business leaders, community leaders. And they told us that Alberta needs to be three things: a place of opportunity, a place of belonging, a place of solutions. And it was remarkable the consistency across those demographics about those three things. They differ in how we get there, but they all said these are the three things that Alberta needs to be. We then said, what's the plan to achieve that? How do we actually make this happen? And instead of taking a traditional economic development approach, which is picking sectors, we took a different approach. If we're going to be a place of solutions, how do we then build on that and say, what are the world's biggest challenges and what are Alberta's strengths and where do those two things intersect? And we identified three, what we call prosperity missions, which we think are the things that will drive investment in Alberta, job creation in Alberta, but also enable us to develop solutions built here, made here, exported from here in Alberta to the world's biggest challenges. And there's three of them. The first one is feeding everyone healthy, sustainable food. Second is energy solutions, low carbon energy, materials and minerals. And the third is healthy lives, wellness, and medical advancements. Those are three areas that we think we can compete and win. We can compete and develop solutions, and we can become a place where everybody in the world that wants to solve challenges around feeding people, energizing things, and making healthy lives will come to Alberta. They will be drawn here. That will be about who we are and the challenges that we solve, because Alberta likes to roll up its sleeves and tackle the big challenges. We have figured out many things here in Alberta: how to extract oil out of sand, how to drill sideways underground at a kilometer deep, and how to add vodka to Clamato juice to make in my opinion, a really disgusting drink.
You were going to find and cure hepatitis, but okay, we'll go with
We've
this.
also done that as well. Exactly. So it's meant to be visionary. It's meant to be inspirational. It's meant to ensure that we involve and create opportunity for Indigenous peoples in Alberta, for newcomers to Alberta, for people who have traditionally been marginalized, those with disabilities, etc. We want to build framework that enables all Albertans to begin to sort of talk about Alberta and talk about its future in a very consistent language. That is the way we will win. When the biggest success for us is hearing other people tell it back to us,
Right.
or say, yes, this really resonates with me. I'm going to build it into my messages, my engagements, my communications, my strategies, my stories.
Mm-hmm.
We did this for Alberta, not for us. It was for Albertans by Albertans. We were simply the mirror that is reflecting the hopes, ambitions, and inspirations of Albertans back to them.
Right. So after thousands of conversations, thousands of pages of research, a year's worth of work, what are some of those key insights, takeaways, lessons that, you've learned about the province and our future?
I would first say it was a tremendous privilege to do this work, because we did talk to so many people and hear the stories and beliefs about Alberta. And there's a number of things. First, Albertans are incredibly proud of this place we call home. They believe in this place. They have come to this place. They have settled in this place. They want to build and continue to build something. They want to reclaim our entrepreneurial spirit. They feel that since about 2014, 2015, we've been kind of down. We have felt this sort of combination of hard done by and sorry for ourselves. And so Albertans said, we need to recapture that part of our DNA that has made us unique. And that needs to be reflected back in the plan. The Albertans see very consistently those 3 points of the vision: the place of belonging, opportunity, and solutions. And it was remarkable to see that collective perspective. Albertans are tired of division. We know we've been spent too much time that have had manufactured wedges that is dividing our communities. We've competed too long, Calgary versus Edmonton, while the rest of the world looks at us and goes, these guys can't get their act together, so we'll compete at a better scale than they will. We have to get past those divisions, those rivalries.
Mhm.
Albertans are tired of it, and they feel it's time to come together. Albertans are disappointed with government, and that's not a critique of any one specific government. They're just tired of seeing governments fighting with each other. And they say, look, the more you fight, the less prosperous we become.
Mm-hmm.
So figure it out and let's move on. The thing we found is that in our research, pretty much every jurisdictional plan looks the same. If you look at economic development strategies, that's why we created this mission-based approach to try and be somewhat different and unique. We face a ton of competition. So again, the notion of division, the notion of fighting, the notion of urgency needs to be forefront. And we can't continue to we can't hamstring ourselves with barriers, inefficiencies, regulation, et cetera, that makes us uncompetitive. And I think Albertans want to go far, which means we need to go together, if you follow the African proverb. So it's about collaboration. It's about coming together. It's about working together. Those are I think the biggest things that I took away from talking to all those Albertans.
Yeah, I was really struck by just how united Albertans really are and what they want for their future. And that's definitely something that I took away from all of the conversations that, I had in the engagement process and, with the Prosperity Advisory Committee and the task force, and just how united and like the North Star was almost very clear and came out in Define the Decade. So this, I don't know, I'll speak for myself. I think this project is one of the career makers
For sure. Yeah.
Totally.
for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Define the Decade was obviously the biggest policy piece that we put out, but not the only policy piece. So walk us through some of the other policy wins, challenges that we've experienced throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to pile more on top of Define the Decade, but we managed to find a way to do so. So we released a paper on a low carbon industrial strategy, which is really working with our Energy Environment Committee about what might be a way in which we could tackle the emissions issues and ambitions of the country, but do it in a way that continued to build prosperity not only for Alberta but the country. So that was a paper that we released earlier in the year, and then much of the year was spent on responding to federal government consultations and submission options. So we did one on the Clean Fuel Standard, we did one on the Clean Electricity Standard, we did one on the oil and gas emissions cap, and finally we did one on the fertilizer consultation. So lots of work in assessing proposed frameworks or options, working with the membership and determining what they felt were workable or what was not workable, and where they think they could be improved. And so I would say outside of Define the Decade, that was really a key focus for us. And then finally, we did a second paper on long-term unemployment. As I mentioned earlier, we are concerned about the proportion of Alberta unemployed who are unemployed for more than a year. It's the highest in the country, and it's been growing for a while. It took a bit of a dip over the summer, but it's kind of on an upward trajectory again. So what are some public and private sector responses that would help people who are finding themselves unemployed more than a year? Because it actually can be very problematic to get back into the workforce. People lose the currency of their skills. They exhaust financial reserves. They also has a significant mental health impact. So ways in which we can tackle that long-term unemployment problem through some combination of both employers doing some things, but also some shifts in everything from EI benefits to skill and training programs that are jointly funded by the federal government and the provincial government, about ways to adapt and focus more on people who have been long-term unemployed.
Right. And then also on the provincial front, we did quite a bit of work on AISH.
Yeah, so I mean, we were advocating on the reindexing of AISH. I think that was a tremendously unfortunate decision back in previous budget. I'm glad to see that Premier Smith has not only reindexed AISH but reindexed income supports. We just have to make sure we're not affecting those most vulnerable and those that struggle the most. So I'm really excited to see that back in place.
Yeah, I'm pleased with that one too. And for anyone who's not as familiar with the acronym, AISH is Assured Income for the Severely Handicapped. And when it was de-indexed, that meant that it didn't increase naturally every year with inflation, which is generally just a small amount of money, but can make a huge difference to people who are living on very, very, very tight and fixed incomes. So if that's looking back, let's look ahead as we begin to close in on a couple of our final sections here. Adam, what's got you excited for next year?
I think building on the momentum of Define the Decade and just, I mean, we've done 85, probably close to 90 presentations. I did one last night to a board of directors, and just the resonance of the themes in that report and that strategy. People nod their heads and say, yes, when I talk about the vision, that is the Alberta that I want. When we talk about the prosperity missions, people say, yes, absolutely. Those are our key things that we can zero in on to be competitive, prosperous, and solve challenges. So it's building on that, is continuing to identify where policy changes need to happen, where collaborations need to happen. I truly think this is Alberta's moment, and to continue to build upon that. But again, as I say, it's just the resonance and the nodding and the recognition that, yes, that is my Alberta that I see and hear in the presentations we've done all across this province. So that's my biggest thing, is I think we've, as I say, we've reflected the mirror of Albertans right back at them, and they're seeing themselves reflected in it. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I get really excited for the future of this province when I think about what we have the potential to do if we are purposeful.
Well, and it's really powerful, and it creates a very inspiring call to action that if people see this is my Alberta, they'll get involved in actually making some of these things happen, which is really exciting.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask. Anything next year, just to pull that thread a little further, that you'd like to see happen? You're hopeful, thinking specifically about Define the Decade. If you could see something in there move, or you think something might move, what would it be?
I think we have opportunities for private sector, provincial, and even federal collaboration to make some of the missions happen. They might be sort of more targeted pieces in there. I think that's a huge possibility. I think for us to identify what are some of those low-hanging fruit in terms of policy changes. I'm excited to see if there is a coalition or some sort of cohesion around a couple of these, what we call catalysts, which were things we think could advance the concepts. And so one was an Alberta mission agency, which would be similar to a historical legacy of Alberta called AOSTRA, the Alberta Oil Sands Technology Research Authority, which Premier Lougheed at the time had the vision to unlock the prosperity potential within the oil sands. I think there is time for an Aostra too. And so I think something around someone or something to take on this mission agency concept.
Would you compare that at all to like a DARPA in the United States? Do you think that's a fair comparison?
Very, very similar. Yeah. DARPA is sort of the US well-known example that's basically commercialized technologies that we use in our phones and everything, and even the internet day-to-day kind of thing. But Aostra is the Alberta lived example. Yeah. Exactly. And, I just hope that if I'm traveling the province and speaking with different groups, that one day I hear this notion of elements of the plan that they're talking about it, as opposed to just us talking about it.
So that's a little more optimism than you're always good for. How about
yes, glass half empty guy.
So let's go to where you feel naturally. What's keeping you up at night when you look ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I'm worried about inflation and continued interest rate increases and what that's going to do, primarily for the most vulnerable Albertans. And I just hope we don't overshoot that. And because I don't think they'll be able to then ratchet down rates fast enough. I worry about the sort of yo-yo effect. And that, I do think the era of extremely low interest rates are gone, but we have to be thoughtful about how much pain we want to self-inflict to deal with something that, again, is a supply-driven issue. So that keeps me up at night. I don't know if it keeps me up at night, but it's just sort of an ambition or a hope, is that somehow our country can find its way to say, the world needs us. They need our food. They need our energy. And we will do what our friends and allies need in this moment in time. It may affect our targets or our ambitions, but the world's needs right now are greater than us. And I think that's unfortunately what we're not seeing right now. So those are kind of the big
things
for me.
That keep you up at night. And how about for the Business Council itself? Would you give us a little preview? What's the council going to be working on next year? What can we look forward to?
Well, more rollout to define the decade in terms of sharing and awareness building and sharing the story and narrative. Regulatory reform, we just struck a task force on how to improve the regulatory process in the country. Canada's got a very well-earned reputation for being a place where we can't really build very much. So we've assembled a task force of our members who have the bruises from previous experiences to help us, the scars, to help show us where change could be possible and how we could transform the system, and then looking at other countries around the world that do it better, while always maintaining environmental integrity, human rights, due process, due consultation, Indigenous engagement and reconciliation. All those sorts of things are must-haves, but there's a way to transform things. And then finally, I hear it every day from our members, is that talent is a key thing, and that there are many, many shortages across different occupations and industries. I would say it's most acute in the skilled trades side. So what can we do from a skilled trades immigration standpoint that might be some new solutions to the problem? We'll be tackling that next year as well.
So as we conclude our final episode of this year, you are a very big reader. And so this is like a two-sided question. What are you reading right now? And what book would you recommend people read going into next year?
So don't think I'm crazy, but the book I'm reading right now is called The Making of the Atomic Bomb. No, I'm not planning on making one in my backyard, but I'm fascinated by the scientific inquiry and then the geopolitical and wartime impetus that sparked it, the building of it. And it's a fascinating read. It is a gigantic book. So, be prepared for it. It's not a weekend read. And it's very scientific. I don't know anything about physics, but this has tried to educate me. So that's what I'm reading right now. 2 recommendations for the year. One is another book by Lachlan Smith, who I'm a big fan of, and it's called How the World Really Works. So he's identified a number of different parts of the way we work and live, and talks about the realities of technology and science, etc. And the second one is The End of the World is Just the Beginning by Peter Zeihan, which is more of a geopolitical forecast and outlook based on what's going to happen with deglobalization, where the world's resources are allocated, demographics, and ultimately which nations and regions will be the winners and losers of this over the next couple of decades. It's fascinating enough that he's going to be speaking to our members at our February 10th meeting in 2023.
So what's one final insight or takeaway that you would like our listeners to take from this year and then into next year?
it would be that Alberta's just getting started. I won't even entertain the notion that our best days are behind us. I think they're ahead of us, and I never underestimate the resilience, the passion, the drive, capability of Albertans. And I think this next decade is truly ours to define. And that's what, that's what keeps me up at night. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is the potential that this place and the people of Alberta hold. And so I think it's time to tell the world that we're just getting started.
I think that's a great note to leave it.
Agreed. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Brief, an Alberta Better podcast series. This podcast is a production of the Business Council of Alberta, and you can learn more about us at businesscouncilab.com. And we'd love to connect with you on social media, so give us a follow at BizCouncilAB on Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, and YouTube. And finally, don't forget to subscribe and rate the show and give us a quick review. Your support helps us to keep making more episodes. Alberta Better is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in January 2023 with a brand new season. Happy holidays and have a happy new year.